to share as there's the recordings in. I've been to speak at a lot of different places, but this is our second in-house webinar, and we feel so lucky that you're joining us today to learn how to create, get approval, allocate a budget for your team building events. I'm Lee. I'm your host for today. It's so wonderful to meet you all, and I'm the founder and CEO at Confetti. Which if y'all don't know about us, we'll talk about a little bit later, but I'm one of the world's experts in employee culture and event planning, especially virtual team building. My company Confetti has over 6,250 customers, including companies like Google and Facebook, and I've had really the luxury and privilege of being able to work with them and helping them improve their culture. And today, oh my gosh, Chrissy, that's so great. So glad that you had a wonderful time at your event today. And I'm so excited to be sharing with you all how to create, get approval, and allocate a budget for your team building events. This is what we're coming here. This is what y'all have signed up for. So I'm just going to cover some webinar objectives. We're going to learn how to come up with a palatable budget that supports your team's initiatives and needs. We're going to discover how to allocate funds across different events, needs using a strategic and balanced approach. And we're going to understand how to effectively pitch and get your budget approved by communicating its value and alignment with the organizational goals. Jessa is going to be my co-host. She's going to be helping me out with some of the polls and questions that we have today. And as you can see, just a little agenda that we've prepared. One of them is we're going to kick things off with a little icebreaker, some poll questions. It's not going to be about astrological signs, but it is going to be about the topics that we're covering. So just be ready with your clickers, with your mouse, to be able to answer those questions. We'll talk about the challenges surrounding team building budgets and why it matters, right? Like I'll sprinkle in some data, share with you things that I think are really interesting to know. And then we'll get straight into the solution, which is really what I want to focus on today. I want to make sure that all of y'all come to this webinar and leave it being like, oh my gosh, I learned so much. This was super helpful. And if there's any time left over, we're going to open it up to Q&A, and I will encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A during the entire webinar. I'm trying to monitor it, but Jess is also helping me out. That way we can make this webinar a little bit more conversational, and Jessa will just flag when we have anything that's on my radar that maybe I have missed. So as we said, we're going to start things with a little poll. And the first one that we're going to do, if Jessa, if you can pull it up, what's engagement and attendance like currently at your company? So option number one is what is engagement? And not great. That's why I'm here. Option number two, it's okay, but could definitely use some help. Number three, we're doing well, but we're excited to learn more strategies. And number four, we're actually just starting our team building journey. Where do we begin? We can all give a little bit of a click. We're gonna we have 17 people that responded so far. That's 68% participation. If the other 8 of you can go ahead and make it, we're going to give about 20 more seconds, and then we're going to close this poll and move to the next one. And super interesting, the large majority of y'all are right in that space. So far, it's 36% of y'all is it's okay, but we can definitely use some help. And 45% of y'all is we're doing well, but we're excited to learn more strategy. But there's still about 14% of y'all that are at the very start of your journey, and 5% that are the vulnerable ones willing to admit, you know, it's not that great, but we're all here today. Awesome. So we're going to end this poll just to share the results so you can see what it is that I saw. Thank you for your participation. And we're going to move on to the next poll for us to share. And I think what's really nice about these polls is just so y'all can feel that you're not alone. Wherever you're falling into the buckets, there's another person, there's another company out there that's in that same boat as you. And we're all working together towards improving every single time. So the next question that we have, Jessa, if you want to go ahead. How much of
this one in the chat, because I don't think it's being pulled up.
All right, let's see if, all right. Yeah, the next one's in the chat. How much of the fund budget does your team actually use per year? So what we found is that there's a very big discrepancy between what CFOs or the finance folks actually give you to be able to use versus actually how much is being spent. This might be a little bit of a tricky one. So if any of y'all can write in the chat, if you're not in the mood because of the technical issues, we can just skip along. We want y'all comfortable to respond to those questions. Awesome. Some people said we don't have a budget. We got 80 to 100%, 90 to 100%. I'm not really sure. Do we even have a fund budget? We don't really have a set budget. So super, super interesting. What's really nice is we're going to be covering all the different ranges of wherever it is that y'all are at. You're going to be able to take something actionable regardless of where you fall into this. Thank you so much for participating. I'm actually going to move on. We're going to skip that last poll question due to the technical issues, and we're going to go straight into why budgeting for team building matters and how can you fix this? What can you do about it? So the first thing I think is talking about travel first. Sharing their stats, and I think it's super exciting to hear. When organizing team events, respondents care most about staying within the budget, about 62%, planning fun activities, 49%, and ensuring as much attendance as possible, 37%. Gallup said team building budget equals engagement. They said those with a high level of employee engagement saw a 23% higher level of productivity, and companies reporting lower engagement experienced an 81% increase in absenteeism. That means people aren't showing up to work. The last one from Gallup is businesses are highly engaged. Businesses with highly engaged employees reported a 10% increase in customer loyalty and engagement. And one of the reasons why I love these stats so much is that we can actually start to prove that there's an ROI in investing in culture. And it's not just like, oh, we're trying to, put together fun events for the sake of fun events. I actually think that that's great in and of itself, but actually there is a business impact that is affecting the bottom line, which we'll talk about in future slides, but that is super helpful to bring up to your finance folks or whoever else you're pitching confetti or whatever service or tools you're providing of why team building is important. And then the last one here is through a company called Team Building. Worldwide, 2,500% more organizations are investing in virtual team building in response to COVID-19. Of course, now there's also just the everlasting state of virtual events, and we're seeing that has not slowed down. They're continuing to invest, especially if they're remote first, if they're hybrid. So it's really great to see that. So what's the problem? We have some highlight areas. The problem areas are planners not knowing how to ask for the budget, planners not knowing what to budget or how to manage that budget. So an example is that they divide between events if they get it, if they're dividing their budget between different events, or if they get it all at once for the year. Are they supposed to use their entire budget? What and how to utilize the budget? So these are some of the problem areas that we've discovered, and we're going to be talking about today to hopefully help y'all fix these challenges that you're overcoming. A quick disclaimer, I think that is worthwhile to say that I'm going to be sharing with you industry standards and what we see from the greater than 6,000 companies that we work with. But a lot of this is also super subjective. And I think that the key is figuring out what works best for you and your company. And each company is totally different. The culture is different, and you know your company best. So take all of these learnings with a little bit of a grain of salt and try to mold it and see what resonates best for you. So we're going to kick things off by sharing how to create a budget that makes sense for your organization. And there are 4 main pillars that you need to consider when it comes to how to come up with a budget. We're going to be digging deeper into each one of these, but it's the right cadence, the company size, how big is your company, the event size, is this like a small event or is this a very big and important event? And also, what are some important initiatives that you think resonate with your company and organization? Let's start with the right cadence, which is really how often do you want events? So some tips for this is you should have a minimum of one touch point per quarter in order to maintain a healthy and connective culture. The goal is to try to offer something around once a month to those employees, and knowing that they're going to attend about 6 to 8 of those events per year. So we, of course, see companies that have much less if they're struggling with participation. We created our last webinar around how to increase participation. We're happy to follow up with you after this webinar so you can see that in case you missed it. But you want to try to get to a point where each employee is doing about 6 to 8 events per year, but starting off with 4 is really good, so once per quarter. For quarterly events, we've really recommended 2 different paths for customers. Again, it depends on their culture, and that's where that disclaimer comes into place. You need to decide what's best for you. But as you see here, you can kick off the year with a team event, go into a departmental event, do another team event, and then finish off the year with a company-wide event. Or what we see is sometimes when companies are hiring a lot in that first quarter, it's actually best to do that holiday party or the company-wide event in Q1. That way everybody feels really included in that experience. They're not just hearing stories about the holiday party, then moving on in Q2 to that team event, Q3 to that departmental event, and then finishing off the year with their team, which is actually the team that, your team is the most intimate relationship that you have within the workplace. They're the ones who's working the closest with you from a day-to-day basis. So it's also nice to finish off the year with the folks that you're very connected with. The second one that we're going to be talking about is company size. So pretty straightforward. This is the right budget that we recommend for teams depending on their company size, alongside what we see on average from customers that have come to us. So a small company size usually is allocating around $50 to $100 per employee per year. Usually small is defined as companies that are under 100 employees in this case. A medium-sized company is between 100 to 1,000 employees. These are companies that are a bit more established. Usually we see that they're allocating around $200 to $400 per person per year. So anywhere from $50 a quarter, for example, to $100 a quarter. And then our large customers, these are 1,000+ employees. You're seeing from them an allocation of around $400 per employee per year. And sometimes you even see thousands of dollars. It really depends on the macroeconomics. It really depends on whether the company is thriving or not, whether that includes offsites, gifting. There's a lot that we're going to unpack here in future slides, but it's okay and it's normal if you have less, but this is a really good benchmark to know what you're trying to achieve as you grow to stay competitive, especially in an employee market, and to start building the best possible culture, which is really the most important. This is purely budgets that are allocated for fun team building events. This budget is not allocated for offsites, which we're going to get a bit more into in future slides. The other pillar that we mentioned, it's the third pillar, is things that might affect your budget is the event size. So we're not talking about headcount here. We're saying things that are like important to the event, to the company, whether you'll consider this like an affordable or a well-financed experience. Again, this might vary, but an affordable experience is usually under that $25 per person mark. And this is usually what we recommend for those in-between moments. They help maintain culture day to day. Look at it as a replacement for especially for remote companies, back in the day, those happy hours that would happen after work. This is the best version of those happy hours. And then you have like a small event. So a small event is usually between 25 to 50 people. There's usually a very flexible policy regarding attendance. Things like this could be a diversity, equity, and inclusion event, or an onboarding experience is a different use case, or professional development is a different use case, where those maybe are mandatory, but you're usually in that $25 to $50 per person range for any of those initiatives. The third one is a medium-sized event. So something that's usually around that $50 to $100 per person. This usually happens a couple times a year. It should feel a little bit more different. It should feel more elaborate than your other experiences. Usually we see about 1 to 2 times a year for those medium-sized events. And the well-financed events is the last one. It's usually experiences that are $100+ per person. These are meant for really special opportunities. They're either milestones, or there's some kind of important element of the business, like a 10-year company anniversary, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. We also do see that for customer events, usually companies are coming to us with that medium to well-financed budget ranges. But again, each company is a little different. You got to do what's right for you. So we're going to talk about the last pillar that might affect your budget, which is how important of an initiative this is. So you need to think and sometimes even get creative on knowing what initiatives are important to your team and your organization. If you're not super creative, our team at Confetti is welcome to help you, and you can fill out a form, and we're going to send you over some options. Jess, I don't know if you're sending it now or sending it after this webinar, but we'll have a form for you to fill out. There are 4 main pillars for creating important initiatives, and you want to analyze the industry that you're in. For example, if your company is in the pet industry, maybe you're going to want to celebrate National Pet Day or National Dog Day, Cat Day, etc. The second one is that you're going to want to celebrate major milestones, maybe, trying to get to a very big achievement within the organization that you're all cohesively aligned on. The third one is by culture, little things that make your company unique. For example, a company anniversary or a holiday party. We recently came across a company and a customer who has this, takes a very serious, inside joke with their team. That's like a National Avocado Day, and they do all kinds of avocado related challenges and experiences. So you got to tap into your culture and see what are the things that are quirky that make your company unique, and consider that an important initiative. And then the last one is by request. So serving the team and making sure you're creating experiences that are truly centered around their needs. So we actually have an event survey we're going to talk about later in the slides, but to be able to help you survey those team members for whatever it is that they're looking for. And through the data, you'll be able to see if a certain amount of employees are really looking to get more connected with the C-suite or get more connected with new hires or whatever it is. You can start to create an initiative that's based off of those requests. And then ultimately, you want to map all of this out. You want to create almost like a designated wish list and say, okay, these are all the things that I think are really important for us to do. And you want to start prioritizing based off of the budget, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. So you got to stay for more. All right, so we're moving on to the second part of this webinar, which is how to manage the budget by the company's needs. How do we assess what those needs are? So the first thing is that you're going to want to break up your budget by the different needs. I'm going to list them out really quickly, but as you can imagine, we're going to be diving into each one of these next. So by level, offsites, gifting, swag, diversity, equity, and inclusion, interest groups, volunteering / social impact. So let's start first with the 6 levels of company culture. First, it's important to note that there are 6 levels of company culture. It's the team culture, the departmental culture, the cross-departmental culture. This is, the teams that work very closely together, the company-wide culture, and interest groups and agile teams. I'll talk about that in a second, but we have surveys that I mentioned we can pass along to you, or if you prefer to use your own survey tools, you can use this link that Jessa is putting into the chat right now to get inspiration of the things that you should prompt your team and ask them. For the team level, these are the teams that I mentioned you're working most intimately with. This is quite frankly the most important culture that you should optimize for across the organization, because just naturally you spend the most amount of time with them. The second one is your departmental culture. And it's just important to feel that your team is not alone and together you make up something that's greater. Maybe you can learn from other teams how they handle different objections or different challenges that they deal with. Cross-departmental, every department probably works closely with another department, but they often clash because they don't work together well because no one told them that it's important and invested in the efforts in really making sure that they're connected. So I always tell my team that this company is one big team. There is no us against them. If HR doesn't work, we have a crappy culture. Everyone's going to be upset. If marketing isn't good, we'll probably all be out of our jobs. If sales doesn't close, what marketing brings to the door, we again probably won't be either. We're all dependent on one another, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So it's really important that the departments that work really closely together also have these moments to connect throughout the year. Agile teams, slightly less common, but we do come across essentially companies that put together temporary workforces or temporary teams that solve a project together. Usually they're longer term projects that require, 1, 2, 3, 6, 12 months, whatever that case might be. Company-wide, it's obviously always really great to feel aligned with the greater vision of the organization. And then the last one is interest groups. So most relevant for large organizations, often starting at a couple hundred employees. So no sweat if you haven't started these already. They usually form organically many times, but it's also helpful if you do have the budget for interest groups to have HR give these groups a little bit of a nudge. It really depends on the culture and getting those interest groups to form. The next part of this webinar, we're going to talk about offsites, which a lot of companies talk to us about and ask us if we can help them with. We cannot help anybody yet with offsites, but this is a very big portion of the budget that is usually separate from your regular fund day-to-day budget. So keep that in mind. Again, every company is different, but we usually see different budgets being allocated for offsites and different budgets being allocated for fun team building, the day-to-day stuff. Usually, as you see, the average budget that's being allocated towards offsites is between $1,500 to $2,000. And it's obviously becoming a lot more popular for remote first companies to gather their employees in one place. And it could be once or twice a year, it could be every other year. So for small companies, usually under 500 employees, they're doing these offsites company-wide, or if they can't afford it, they're just getting senior management together. And they're usually doing it every year or every other year because that can get very expensive pretty quickly. And then for medium/large companies, which is usually 500 employees, Ivan, this is still per person, right? And yes, that is per person. So as you can imagine, you got 10 people, you're like already looking at $10,000, $20,000. Like it adds up really quickly, which is why it's not something that companies can be able to do. But just between flights and hotels and food, and sometimes companies want to offer childcare to help support parents who are leaving their children at home during these events, it really starts to add up. You usually want to do activities, you want to book meeting rooms. It becomes expensive very, very quickly. Medium/large teams, I've even seen companies that allocated up to $10,000 per employee. Those are the ones that really go big. They usually, are doing very elaborate, fun things together, like maybe bringing in a celebrity or doing a small concert. At that point, usually the medium or large companies aren't doing offsites company-wide anymore. Usually they're either just getting that senior management together, or they're starting to break those offsites per team or per department. Those offsites, again, can happen anywhere from 1 to 4 times a year once you're a medium or large size companies, but again, at least every other year for those offsites. So let's talk a little bit about gifting. This is the third one, which is usually allocated separately again from your regular fund budget. So really important that you keep that in mind, but you should speak to your finance teams just to make sure that you know exactly what you can and cannot spend. So as you see here, there's usually 3 different buckets of gifting. There's anniversaries, which is company anniversaries, not people who are married anniversaries. That hopefully happens once a year because their yearly anniversary comes up. You have birthdays, which happens once a year. And then I like to also put a budget of miscellaneous, which happens anywhere from twice a year. So we put a higher priority on anniversaries at Confetti because that loyalty is much more important to us in the organization as opposed to, correlated with the company needs like birthdays. And I think that it's ironic that we started off with this astrology signs. But birthdays, we all know how some people are very freakishly important. They find birthdays very freakishly important and we feel like we can't ignore them. So we usually have a very high emphasis on corporate anniversaries, and we do something small and symbolic for the birthdays. I think, again, from a budget perspective, more important than a birthday is maybe even those miscellaneous little gifts. Usually this is something very nominal, $5, $10, $20, $30 per each gift. And it's really just a personalized touch that you can add to an employee potentially during those hard days or during those really fun and important days. So just a small feel-good story. Jessa here, for example, when she closed her first big deal at Confetti, she's no longer in sales, but she sent me an email and she said something like, "It's so pretty, I could frame it," regarding the invoice. And so I sent her a frame. And I think that those little moments are very memorable and they instill a lot of loyalty. And I think that that's a really great example. Another thing is during Q4, which is our busiest time of the year, we comp a few more meals, a few more trips to Starbucks. It's like the little things that sometimes help add motivation. And I think having a budget for those miscellaneous items really just help move the needle forward when instilling a really good culture for your team. We'll talk about swag, which is the fourth one, which is also separated usually from your regular fund budget. Again, this is very different from each company, but this is just the standard. It's usually a separate budget that's allocated from your team building events. Usually swag is something that's done around once to twice a year. Just as a side note, Confetti, we're currently working on building out our swag, our gifting collections. But one thing that I really loved about what we're doing is it's very personalized. So each employee can choose which swag item they want. So if they feel like they already own 1 million water bottles and they don't want to own another water bottle, they can choose the blanket, and each person essentially gets to choose whatever it is that they want. I think that this is really great because it increases the chance of your employees actually using your swag items, and it just minimizes trash and them throwing the item away, which is bad for the environment, not great. I also think that a pro tip for this is just do things that are customer facing. That way, if they're on their Zoom screen or something that they want to bring to a customer meeting, just so you have a little bit more of that logo facing, it's very professional looking. So you want things like notepads, shirts, water bottles, and again, things that they can kind of choose their own adventure. So diversity, equity, inclusion, another surprising thing, but this is usually allocated separately from your regular fund budget if you are a medium or large company, but is usually something that is combined together if you are a small company. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Usually different companies have started to formulate different minority groups, things like affinity groups, mental and physical health, invisible disabilities, and the people who are responsible for small companies for putting together team building events usually incorporate these diversity, equity, and inclusion events inside their programming. When you're a medium or large company, you usually either have somebody within HR that's responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or you have ERGs, employee resource groups, and they're responsible for essentially conducting these fun experiences that are related to whatever minority they are representing. Similarly, but different, is interest groups, also separately from your regular fund budget if you are a large company. This usually doesn't exist as a budget at all if you are a small or medium-sized company. So again, just helpful to know what is like the standard. That way, if you're like, hey, I want to create like a wine club or a book club or a running club or a sports team rec club, whatever it is, know that if you're in that small to medium range, usually companies don't have a budget allocated. That means if you want to do it, you can do it, but it's probably going to be each employee paying for their own. For large companies, they do start to subsidize some of these fun after work activities. So something to think about. And then the last one here is social impact, which is usually integrated with your regular fund budget if you're a large company, or separated as a corporate social responsibility. Usually this budget doesn't exist at all if you're small or medium, but it is gaining in popularity. And I think some things that are worthwhile mentioning is that customers are usually booking around one social impact experience per year. They might be emailing nonprofits directly, and they're trying to match that nonprofit to something that is relevant to their business and their goals. They're creating maybe a mentorship program where they're helping kids coming out of college to be able to help land jobs by reviewing their resumes, or helping coach them on interviewing conduct. But they maybe, in most cases, we find have a designated community service day. This is not a must, but it allows for this feeling that the entire organization is going out to do this really great thing once a year. They give a stipend to go out and do good in the community, pick up trash, volunteer at a soup kitchen, buy a plant it, whatever that might be. So we're going to move on to the last section of the webinar, and I'm going to try to zoom through it as fast as possible, but we're going to talk about how to effectively ask for budget and communicate your needs. And I will mention that we have a wonderful freebie of templates. We have curated 5 free actual email templates that can help you ask various stakeholders for meetings, help in creating and assessing your budget. But I want to focus the last part of the webinar on other important things to note, because y'all will be able to get access to that and review it on your own time. So before you even pitch your request for a budget, it's really good to ask these 4 questions. So what kind of financial position is the company in? How much did they spend on events last year? How many events are you proposing to host in the coming financial year? And what field do you want to curate for the team? So whether you have a budget or not, ideally you should be following these steps. So defining the why before the what. So getting to the understanding of why do you want to do these experiences, which we'll talk about in the next slide. You should have conversations in advance, and you want to get buy-in from the different teams or departments that you're representing. And that's where those surveys that I mentioned earlier will really come in handy. You want to research and plan concrete options, and you want to budget also for unplanned expenses, because new employees pop up and maybe you want to be able to include them. Things happen where you do one initiative and somebody requests to do another initiative. And then you want to take those plans, you want to get buy-in again, to making sure that your different teams, different departments are in line with what it is that you're doing. But you want to make sure that you're setting their expectations in advance, that you don't have the budget yet really allocated for this. You just want to make sure that you're proposing the right plan for them that's associated with something that they would be happy with. Then you really want to go do research, because data is your friend. You have a lot of research now from this webinar, but you want to make sure that you know the cost of the different events that you're interested in, and you want to be able to ultimately get to that next step, which is approaching the right person. So you need to figure out within the organization, who is that right person? Is it the CFO? Is it the VP of finance? And ultimately, you want to ask them for a meeting. That is one of the templates that we have in the freebies. And we'll talk about this again in the next slide, but you want to tie the business goals to each function. And you want to ideally start small. So starting something that's quarterly or even just one event. And then as you're starting to gain traction and momentum and positive feedback, that can allow you to renegotiate the budgets and the programming that you have. Ideally, you should make these presentations short and sweet, alongside your email short and sweet. You want to be able to be prepared for tough questions, for budget cuts. So just making sure that you already have your experiences prioritized and you know exactly what's the most important and what's maybe the nice to have stuff. You want to be able to present this with confidence because confidence always sells. And once you got that budget approved and you start moving forward with actually your plan is starting to run into place, you really want to track everything. The performance of these experiences, the compliments that you're receiving, any hiccups that you ran into, any adjustments within spending. And then ultimately that next year, you want to review all of that stuff that you tracked, and you want to replan and rebudget those things coming now with new and fresh information that's backed with data. So in hopefully my last real slide, and I mentioned this in the last slide, you want to tie your budget requests back to a strategy. So you want to see, how will this spend help the company? Is it going to increase retention? Is it going to decrease churn? Is it going to improve morale? Is it going to hit our revenue goals? And examples of goals that you may provide is things like, we want to improve our service levels, or we want to cut our costs, or we want to grow our market share, increase our competitiveness if you're looking to try to hire a lot of employees, or just expanding collaboration. So you need to figure out what are the goals that are really associated with your business. And then you want to tie that back into your pitch, and ultimately help prove the ROI, and try to see if anything can be measured with this work that you're doing. Can you create these programmings for the customer support team and then be able to see if there are improved customer service levels? Or can you work with HR to see if there was an improvement in retention or churn? So as I mentioned, there are 5 templates for approaching budget decisions with your team that we're going to be giving as a freebie. The first one is requesting for a meeting to discuss culture and initiatives. So an important starting point is defining the why before the what, and having conversations with stakeholders before you begin. So the first template will really help you with this request, that initial meeting with your department leader, really understanding the current state of the team, identifying objectives for the future. And a meeting like this will help you define the team needs and know what needs to be included in your team building budget. And the second one is a template that is revolved around inquiring regarding culture budget needs. So you should have a separate meeting with your finance team, and it's important to understand the financial state of the company, how different budgets are currently being allocated. So are we talked about like gifting versus swag. Are they actually separated budgets in your company, or are they together? And just setting this time will give you an opportunity to express the findings that you have about those cultural needs with the company, and discuss what is needed and what is possible financially to support these initiatives. The third template is a meeting request, which is a discussion on a new budget approval. The third one is confirmation to utilize the allocated budget culture. And the last one is a template for requesting an increase in budget for culture initiatives. And I want to try to leave one opportunity for any Q&A. So I think I see one that popped up, and we can try to utilize that in the last minute that we have here. And I'm happy to stay a little bit longer to answer anybody's questions here, but I did want to give y'all an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. Gonna just read this first one. This is an anonymous attendee. This is outside virtual events, but I figured I'd ask. We've recently started adding international folks to our team. We are US based, Any advice on how to go about / experience shares on determining budgets for an offsite where international travel may be involved? Someone in a particular country might not be able to travel to a particular location without having to apply for a visa. Really good question. I think that ultimately a lot of this is really assessing certain employees and making sure that they're comfortable with the circumstance. So we have an international team, and that international team has its own offsites that they gather with individually, and our other team in the US is gathering individually too. When we have the capacity to afford both of them meeting together in one designated space, we definitely want to prioritize that, but now we're still in the small company range. But I would have a conversation with that person and say, you know, we want to be able to do this. Can we help them get a visa? Are they interested in coming? Maybe they'll just share with you, like, you know, and transparently saying, like, you know, we want you to come to this event, but do you want to come? Is this something that's important to you? If the answer is yes, let's see what actions we can do to help make sure that your attendance is actually met. And if not, how do we get a comparable activity? So maybe just creating a separate, fully virtual experience in tandem for any of the folks who can't participate in that offsite. And just being very transparent with those team members and trying to kind of bridge both worlds. Are there any other questions? And if I didn't answer your question correctly, feel free to write a new one. Awesome. Jess, I think, remind me though, I think we mentioned that the quarter before, but I don't want to leave anybody who is ending at 3:15 at least Eastern time away from any other potential meetings, or do we have the honor of being with them until 4?
I think it's up to you. I think you can see if any other questions come up, and see who can stick around if you'd like.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm open to seeing any other Q&As, but I don't see any. So assuming that I have everybody's questions answered, I had such a pleasure chatting with you all today. And if any of you would like to stay in touch with us here at Confetti, here's some information. You're also welcome to stay in touch with me. My email, I'm dropping it here in the chat. And I hope it was helpful. Jessica dropped also the SHRM credit code if that's something that's interesting to you all. And just as a thank you from our side, we have a thank you 50 for $50 off your first Confetti event. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. And yeah, here if you need anything else. With pleasure. Thanks, everybody.